Remember, the Supreme Court yesterday had come out with a landmark judgment. It said that not all privately owned properties qualify as community resources that the state can take over for the common good. The 9-judge Constitution bench, which was led by Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud, delivered the judgment on a vexed issue 7-2 majority. 3 judgments were authored. The Chief Justice wrote one of them. He wrote that for himself, and his 6 colleagues, Justice B.V. Nagaratna, wrote a concurrent but separate judgment, and then it was Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia who dissented it. What are the economic implications of that judgment? We are being joined by Dr. Shamika Ravi, member of Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister of India. Dr. Ravi, really appreciate your time. Do you think this verdict of the Supreme Court is now in many ways crystallization of economic liberalization of India, when individual rights come ahead, take priority of the state?
So, Maria, long-term economic growth is really an outcome of right of individuals to private property, and having an independent judiciary which can protect the right of individuals' property from being expropriated by other individuals as well as by the state. I think it's very important to understand that the laws have to be such that private property expropriation is not only protected against other individuals, but by the state as well, because the state is your most powerful entity and a very important part of the economy. Now, since the late 70s, it became very clear to us by early 90s that the policies of nationalization and heavy bureaucracy and this whole license permit Raj, it denied generations, right? I mean, it denied hundreds of millions of Indians from prosperity, and subsequent growth that we have had since 91 has been on account of the fact that private property is encouraged. And I think the latest ruling that came out yesterday is a very welcome step. In some ways, it reverses significantly the laws enacted and the broader climate under which Indian economy has been functioning till now, which is denying individuals complete individual rights to private property. So it's a very welcome step.
Okay, so then Dr. Ravi, would you then say that there have been some reasonable checks on nationalization post this verdict?
Well, it basically tells you now there are checks on the state from, taking over properties, which is what nationalization was, by the way, right? And after that, we saw what the outcome was. But you need now, I mean, there is enough evidence to see that the recent growth we have had is on the back of course, facilitating government policies, but fundamentally private enterprise. It's Indians and their hard work which is leading to creation of, these wonderful growth across the country, which we are enjoying, on account of which hundreds of millions of people have come out of poverty and so on and so forth. But the basic law still existed, the one of the late 70s, which basically did give the state extraordinary powers to expropriate and take over private property. So yesterday's ruling is very welcome, because now the state is prevented, in a very major way from having rights over private property and basically taking over private property. So those checks basically mean that efforts of, excessive nationalization is checked. By the way, it is not just the state, right? You also have to think of what policies are, how people think. If you remember, in the midst of COVID, when a very large number of economists had also floated the idea that we should just, the state should take over jewelry and land and, property, whatever it sees fit to overcome the COVID crisis. And many of us actually wrote vehemently against it, because, of course, the law is what allows the state to function, but the general sense and the general philosophy which drives people and society, I think had become excessively shackled after the late 70s under Mrs. Gandhi.
But ma'am, I'm looking at the dissenting judgment now. Justice Dhulia, in his dissent, had actually said that excluding privately held property from the purview of Article 39B disregards the practical reality that certain private resources might indeed benefit the public if it is distributed equitably. So, do you think that argument of what directive principles mean is also being revisited in many ways and some form of public welfareism as well?
Yes, absolutely. And more recently, if you realize over the last couple of years, the kind of dangerous rhetoric you are hearing, even within electoral politics, jitni abadi utna haq, we will do a survey of private property. By the way, private property is, hardworking people earning and creating assets and wealth. I don't think the state should have absolute right to take over. So I think this is really, this judgment goes back to the original thinking that we had, which protected individuals' fundamental, rights. And of course, right to property was not a fundamental right. But in many ways, post 70s, the state had been empowered excessively to expropriate whatever, whenever it saw fit, right? It deemed fit. And we have seen, by the way, that getting used, not just during the nationalization phase of banks, etc., but very large segments of the economy. More recently, whether it is a retrospective tax, whether it is the coal allocations, when the courts themselves basically annulled 18 years of reality that existed in the energy sector. I think yesterday's ruling puts a certain check on that, which is a very welcome check, right? Because it sort of shifts the needle back to the original thinking, which is that individual private property must be protected. And of course, when there are extraordinary conditions and situations, the state has the power to basically use and take over resources, but those are now thankfully restricted even by the law. So I think it's a very welcome step, and this is going to embolden the basic private property, the way individual rights have to be empowered for long-term economic growth and development of a nation like ours.
My last question to you, Dr. Shamika Ravi, in this particular case, you had the government of West Bengal, which is of course an opposition ruled state, supporting the arguments which was made by the government of India and the Maharashtra government. Would you then say that this judgment has charted a middle path that resonates with India's economic growth ambitions, that you have to respect individual property rights as much as social welfareism?
Oh, absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. And I'm glad that states in opposition are also finally rising over short-term politics and thinking about what is good for the country, for the society, for individuals at the end of the day. So I do believe yesterday's ruling is a correction. It's a much needed and long-awaited correction. So opposition parties joining in only reinforces that. I think, this is almost like a commonly held belief, which for long was suppressed. And, even if you look at private investments over the last, let's say, a decade and a half, in reinstating these kind of rights and individual rights over property is a booster. It boosts the confidence that if you work hard and you make wealth, then the state, the laws are going to protect you from other individuals expropriating, or even the state, right? So you need that kind of a protection. There is a fundamental nature in which our growth, our recent growth in our society has moved. And this law is really doing a catch-up game to what is the reality of Indian economy today. which is leading to very fast growth and very, very rapid improvement in our development indicators across the country.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and breaking down this verdict for us and its long-term implications, ma'am.